Okay, great. Wonderful. So I like the format of you doing interviews with people who twinkle at you for some reason or another. I had a TV talk show in Southern California starting in 2001 until the end of March 2007 called Heart to Heart,
Ooh,
where I
nice.
interviewed people. It was like intimate interviews with people who were doing interesting things that interested me. So I had everyone from musicians to politicians to magicians,
Right,
and
exactly.
refugees from the floods in Louisiana. Like I had crazy people, and it was in Long Beach, California, on a cable TV channel that had like 500,000 cable households. So it was like being on TV in LA, in the LA market, but only if you had charter communications.
Wow. Wow.
So
Yeah.
it's
I
a
mean,
great
don't
fun
we?
thing to do interviews with
Yeah.
people that you feel some kind of connection with or want to learn from. It's a great freedom in that kind of format. So I wish you all great
Mm.
success, and that you should have a really good radar, like a divining rod for that twinklation when you see it and say, oh, would you come be on my show? So
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Terry Gross. Don't we all like want to just be Terry Gross?
Right.
My husband was laughing at me. He's like, yeah. He's like, you've been listening to a lot of Terry Gross lately. Are you getting ready for your interview? I adore her. I
I
adore
love her
her.
too.
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay, well, I think we'll start. It's just a little after 4, and I think people probably will trickle in, and we'll just let them in. But I want to start so that I can give my intro and still leave lots of time to hear what Lorelei has to say and ask her lots of questions. I want to welcome everybody that's here so far. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Cyrise. I am called Morah Cyrise, which means teacher. And I'm one of the members of the spiritual leadership team at Havurah Synagogue here in Ashland, Oregon. And as Lorelei and I were just talking about, I teach classes here along with leading services. And this year I had an idea to have a class series that was actually interviews with folks that I am inspired by or whose work is exciting to me, and who others might find interesting as well, and just kind of give a little spotlight to the teaching that these wonderful teachers are bringing into our world. And today we have Lorelai Kude. And I want to just give you a little background. Lorelei, we haven't even had a chance to really drop in and talk about why I'm so excited to talk with you today. I found you on Facebook. My friend Chaya Kaplan Lester in Jerusalem posted one of your podcasts about 9 or 10 months ago. And I was like, astrology, what's this? Got very excited, clicked and listened to your podcast. And I felt just so excited. And I was just kind of swooning to feel the confluence of two great loves of mine, astrology and Judaism, meeting in your intelligent and warm and funny presentation, and the synthesis of these two things that are so much in my heart. I grew up with two astronomers in my family, my grandpa, Jim, and my dad. Both spent evenings with me looking through the telescope, like the rings of Saturn, looking at Mars, Venus, the moon, Halley's Comet. And it all left such a strong impression on me. And of course, we all have grown up reading horoscopes in the paper and usually in the comics section for some reason. I don't know what that's about. But I remember asking as a young person, which one of these am I? And then finding out and staying very abreast on what was going on for us Sagittarians, but never really getting it, and still feeling like it was something very special, that there was something magical, that someone was looking at the movements of the celestial bodies and drawing some kind of guidance from it that I might benefit from. To me, even as a young child, that seemed super magical and really cool. And then when I was 13, my dad's aunt, so my great aunt Angie, came to visit us. And I wasn't thinking much about the visit. I thought she would just be some kind of old woman with, gray hair and not that interested in me necessarily to come visit. And I was blown away when this petite Italian white-haired dynamo arrived at our house. And with sparkling hazel eyes, she looked at me on the first day of her visit and asked me what time I was born, which I didn't know. And so I asked my mom, gave the information to Aunt Angie, who returned a few hours later after she had consulted. I don't know, she must have been carrying like a paper ephemeris, because this was way before the internet. And she came out with 3 pieces of paper titled Leo Rising, Sagittarius Sun, and Scorpio Moon, typed with a typewriter on these like funny old pieces of paper. And I sat down with those papers, and I remember the experience of reading them and just being struck, because I felt like I was reading descriptions of myself. And it brought this like affirmation and relief and understanding that there was some spiritual insight going on, and that my nature was natural. The ways that I found myself to be was natural and real and affirmed on these pages. Blew my mind. She taught me a little bit about the difference between rising signs and moon signs. And I was like, well, there's all kinds of signs that we have. She taught me also numerology. She was amazing. And it was a life-shifting visit with Aunt Angie. May her memory be for a blessing. And it sparked a curiosity. So I kept learning and reading. And the Pocket Astrologer was a yearly Hanukkah gift for me. And I learned all about aspects and sextiles and trines. And it just blew my mind. I loved it so, so much. And as I got older, I followed up by having readings with some cherished astrologers and found their contributions to my life to be highly impactful. I'm wondering if any of you have had similar experiences where an astrology reading really impacted something in your life. And then I reunited in my late teens, early 20s with Judaism, and entered this sweet ocean of Torah study. And at first, I guess I never really thought very much about the connection between the two. I knew there was Western astrology and Ayurvedic astrology and different systems, but it didn't appear to me that Judaism had any system of its own. In fact, it sort of seemed like a no-no, right? And then I read in a book that Mazal Tov literally translates as good constellation or good stars. And I was like, what? And then I started leading new moon groups, Rosh Chodesh groups, and seeing that Hebrew months all had like an animal and a letter and a sign associated to them. And I was like, And then as I deepened in learning our liturgy and our prayers, I was thinking about the prayer Yotzer Or, the prayer where we talk about the movement of the stars in the sky, and the prayer Mariv Aravim, the evening prayer that talks about you set the pathways of the stars in the sky. And I was like, And then I read the text of the prayer El Adon. And again, I was just like, this is talking about our relationship between ourselves and the heavens. This is in our tradition. But I still had never met or heard of a Jewish astrologer. And I wondered if anyone was doing any work or practicing in this field. Then, as I mentioned, Kaya Kaplan Lester posted your podcast on Facebook, and I was like, and went out in the garden and listened, and I was like, someone's doing this. This is amazing. And then I found out you were actually in Berkeley at the Aquarian Minion. And so you were like in my Berkeley home space, and I knew it was the stars, it was destiny.
It was for Schater. It was for
Amazing.
Schater.
And
I was Sagittarius
like,
as well. And Kaya Kaplan Lester is my friend from Israel and my neighbor from Nachla Oats. And I love that you're Sagittarius sun with Leo rising, because that means the sun is your ruling planet, because it's the ruling planet of your rising sign, which puts it in your 5th house of creativity.
That's right.
And your moon in Scorpio in your 4th house is where your love of mystery and magic coming from your family. That aunt story is like, if Linda Goodman was listening to this conversation, she would be writing this down as like a textbook example of your sun, moon, and rising sign and how they work together. And I've never seen your chart, but when's your Hebrew birthday? Are you a Kislev Sagittarius?
Yeah, 24 Kislev.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So when I heard Erev Hanukkah.
Yes, that's right. And all these things were dawning on me, like, this has got to have meaning. This has got to have meaning in our tradition.
Yeah.
And then I found you, and I just want to introduce you. Many of you may know Lorelei, but if you don't, this is Lorelai Kude, Torah Astrologer. She has a master's degree in Jewish studies from GTU in Berkeley, and wrote her thesis there called Yesh Mazal L'Israel. There is Mazal, there is a sign, a star, astrology for Israel. And that laid the foundation for what she's got going on now with her book Astrology and her podcast and her work with people around Jewish astrology. And we're going to learn a lot about that today with Lorelei. It's so great to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. What a great introduction. I love hearing about how you came to this interest. It's such a
I just wanted to give that little background because I am so excited to talk to you.
I'm excited too.
And as I was, coming up with my questions today, I was thinking there are so many more questions I have. So hopefully we'll do this again. It would be so wonderful to have you, around to illuminate different moments that we go through in our calendar year. We're such creatures of moon and rhythm of the stars that sometimes I feel like, what do we do? What do Jews do on the equinoxes? Or
we have that we have very strict rules about it. We're not supposed to be drinking water. That's been uncovered during that time. Like the whole astrological, our relationship to the stars goes back to the very beginning of the Jewish.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, I'm so drawn to mining our tradition for what's not on the surface and really reclaiming things that are part of our tradition that we've sort of been pushed away from, but that have such richness for us.
Right.
So let's start way back in time, in Torah time, and take
back in time.
Torah. Yeah, going back. Rewind. So take us into this Torah time, the first 5 books, the Tanakh, anywhere in there. Do the ancestors have relationships to the stars? I mean, God says to Abraham, he says, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars. So there've got to be other clues, other mentions in the Torah. Can you take us back there a little bit?
I would be happy to do so. Thank you. The Torah and the Tanakh together as a unit, but just talking about the Torah itself, the first 5 books of Moses, and this doesn't come from my Chiddush or original revelation. This has been discussed by our great Torah commentators for thousands of years, 2,000 years since the beginning of writing Torah commentation, with the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Aggadic stories and the Midrashim and everything. There's always been a tradition of understanding the relationship between Israel, the people of Israel, and the constellations. And this has gone, we say that Abraham, our father, our patriarch, was the father of astrology. And I'm talking now in mythological language and religious Torah language. I'm not talking in critical academic language right now. So in terms of Torah language, Abraham, as we say in English, or Avraham, was originally Avram, He was the son of Terach. He was a Chaldean. He was from Ur of the Chaldees. Chaldean is like the word that actually means astrologer. He was literally from the land of the astrologers. He came from
I read that.
a culture that was steeped in astrology. Astrology existed thousands of years before there was a Jewish people. So there's no doubt that astrology as an understanding and practice predated even the first person who could be called a Hebrew, which was Abraham, right? But as we do with all things, we take what is already there and we make it ours in an extremely unique way. So the Torah-centric view around astrology, and even in the writings of the astral magical commentators, Torah commentators of 14th century Spain, who had a whole list of tamei ha-mitzvot, the reasons for doing mitzvot that had to do with astral magic and astral magical understandings of the Torah. This is a completely scalable idea from the very first verse in the Torah all the way through, and all of the different things in the Torah, if you want to look at it from an astral magical point of view, can be explained that way. Now, I don't like to look at everything from an astral magical point of view. I just like to look at what I think is relevant. So I'm not going to say you can cast the entire Torah in that kind of a light, but like Ibn Ezra talks about, he writes about the ephod that the high priest wore in his garments, which we even just talked about in the last Parsha. He talks about the mystery of the ephod being the two shoulder pieces and the straps that hold them together, representing Aries and Libra in the zodiac, the way that Aries and Libra balance the zodiac, like in the natural zodiac, it's always the same exact configuration as it is with the 12 tribes around the Mishkan, the way that it's described in Bamidbar chapter 2. So the 12 tribes left Egypt, encamped 42 times in the desert in their 40-year journey, always in the same exact configuration, always Yehuda to the east and Ephraim to the west, Dan to the north and Reuben to the south, and the other tribes arrayed around them with their degalim, their flags, in the exact order of the zodiac, because they all correspond in that encampment configuration. They correspond to the 12 months of the Hebrew calendar and the 12 signs of the zodiac. So it's spelled out in the Sefer Yetzirah very, very explicitly about that. But in the very earliest midrashim is where we can find the references to assigning what tribes go with what zodiac signs. And you'll read a lot of different things about that. That's kind of an ongoing discussion, but it basically comes down to two camps that are exclusively Jewish camps, and then you have other kind of Christian commentators that come in from other traditions and interject. So I reject all those. And I'm looking at the two Jewish ways to look at the 12 tribes, either chronologically or in their action figure configuration, meaning the encampment, because the Jews have two ways of being, either on the breastplate of the high priest, which is the chronological order, and the high priest is the representative of all the Jewish people before Hashem. So those are all 12 tribes, and that includes the tribe of Levi. Okay, so it's the 12 tribes in chronological order, or there's the encampment order, which is the tribes in manifest in the world, which is also how they work in Eretz Yisrael. So that's like the embodied order. The embodied order starts with Yehuda, who's not the firstborn, but he gets the firstborn position because of his actions. So this is the Kabbalistic order that was really put into place by the Arizal. And so this is more of a development in terms of solidifying that order, and understanding was more in the Ari's time and more of a Kabbalistic thing than having to go back to the beginning. But I think I circumvented your entire question, and I didn't mean to. I'm going to say that unambiguously in the Torah and Tanakh, every single instance of mention of the planets were exclusively and unambiguously that they were the completely glorious and obedient creations of Hashem that served God without variation, without rebellion, without any kind of hesitation, and did exactly what they were supposed to do. And they were the most glorious and gigantic, bright and lustrous of his creations that we were forbidden to worship. Because of course, think about it, before electric light was invented, there was gas light for a few hundred years, but before that it was nothing. Just it got dark and you had torchlight or candlelight. That's all you had. Everything was going on outside in the stars, and every civilization all over the world since humans were invented look up at the sky at night and they see it's HBO, it's Game of Thrones. It's like a whole drama going on. It goes with the seasons, the stars change, the planets move. They're called wandering stars, but they're really planets. There's the fixed stars that are always the same, but appear at different times during the night and different seasons. And of course, people kept track of them. Of course, they drew meaning from them.
Right, of
but
course.
the olden days, like Torah day understandings of the stars, that they were creations and servants of God, which is what we sing about in Yotzer in the prayer at night. I mean, it's so obvious. It literally says the arot, the lights. It's literally talking about the planets. And they say, oh, we don't have anything to do with the planets. Well, yes, we do.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
It's pretty clear. Yeah, it's pretty there if you're looking for it. Okay, thank you so much. A couple things. One is the 12 tribes and the encampment and the circular, 12 points on the circle and the 360 degrees. And there's just some beautiful connection there, isn't there, between the way we observe the heavens and the rotation around the fixed stars of these moving, wandering stars, that, as you call them, and the circle, and then setting up we were moving through our journey from leaving Mitzrayim and coming into Canaan, coming into this promised land, always camping in this configuration of circle or wheel with 12 points, 12 moons, 12 months. So that's such a beautiful point of connection. I feel like that Torah portion, when it comes up, where they describe it, is always kind of rushed through. And yet each tribe, I think it's Jacob's death, where he goes through and talks about each of these tribes and their attributes. And you've, I'm sure, looked at that in depth in terms of just coming to understand the essence of each of those tribal leaders and perhaps the sign that correlates. It's quite rich.
I did a series of videos for the Aquarian Minion over the last year for the Aquarian Minion Yeshiva. Once a month I focused on the Chodesh of the month and the zodiac sign associated with it, the planetary rulers and the tribes. So
I'll be at that class next time.
What?
I'll be at that class next time you teach it.
I'm never teaching it again. I put it all on YouTube. I teach private. I've been teaching private cohorts of beginning and advanced astrologers for years. So I used to have to do this, over and over, but now I'm like, I recorded it. So you can just go watch all the videos and then we'll go on to advanced.
Yes. Good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea. Well, that's so beautiful. So the tribes, the ephod, and the balance of
Aries and Libra. Aries. And of course, the golden calf, that there's all these astral magical commentators. Ibn Ezra writes a whole thing about it, about how it had to do with astrology. Abraham was in the Sefer Yetzirah, talks about Abraham being the father of astrology. There's a lot of stuff in the Talmud and different midrashim about Abraham and astrology. So it's very related to that. And Moses, the whole story of Moses's birth as a Pisces during Chodesh Adar, and the astrologers of Egypt getting his birthday wrong because it was a leap year. They predicted something that was going to happen in first Adar, but it really happened in second Adar.
Ah,
And there's so many ways to look at, and of course, Joseph, he was an astrologer. He had his dream about the sun and the moon and the stars.
right.
He did
Right.
divination, quote unquote, with his cup.
Yeah, his cups. That's what he kept putting in the bag.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Yaakov was also a magician, because his thing with the sticks and the rods that he peeled this and
Right.
put it in front of. He did animal magic with showing them a symbol, and then the animals would mate and their children would come out spotted and speckled, so that he got more
Wow.
flocks than Lavan. This is classical as above, so below magic. That's like part and parcel of the understanding of astrology from the ancients' point of view. But as moderns, we understand that we don't think of it so much as causative, but reflective. Like these are, when
Hmm.
we're talking about these energies, they're not causative, they're reflective. So when I say to you as a Sagittarius that our ruling tribe is Benjamin, and Benjamin's attributes are, think about Benjamin as the youngest of Jacob's children, and his place in the um, tribal apportionment of where the tribes were was tucked inside of this area of Yehuda, his big brother, and the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kodeshim in the base of Mikdash, was literally built on this little part of Benjamin that was sticking into this part of like a finger inside of like a finger of a
Wow.
part and this is Benjamin, and Benjamin's flag, as it's described in the Midrashim, is a rainbow flag. It has all of the colors of all of the other tribes in Benjamin's flag. And he stands in the Holy of Holies. And his ruling planet is Tzedek, Jupiter. Jupiter is Tzedek. Tzedek, what does that sound like? Tzaddik, like a righteous person, like tzedakah, like being generous. These are attributes of Sagittarius. This is an attribute of that Jupiter gives to Benjamin. But is Benjamin making this happen to us, or are we reflecting these qualities because we've inherited them through our spiritual DNA? How has that happened? Because of the date and time and place that we were born. It's like we were gifted with, this is the configuration of the energies at the date and the time and the place that you were born. These are the building blocks, or the possibilities and potentialities of your natal gifts. And also, this is where you came into the story of the Torah.
Right.
Everyone's born during a parsha on one of the 7 days of the week. There's 7 aliyahs in each parsha. Each aliyah of each week belongs to a certain day of the Jewish year. And I look at that when I look at people's charts too, because it's a story. Where you came into the story is on your natal chart in terms of the cycles of the planets and the cycle of sacred time that is our Jewish calendar, and where you came into the story of our Torah.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful piece that Judaism has, that when you are born is actually corresponds to a piece of text,
Right.
and a piece of sacred text. And I was actually wondering, so when you do a reading for someone, you include the position of the stars and the planets at their birth, but also the part of the Torah that's being read, or if it's a holiday, like my son was born on Simchat Torah. And I always thought that was like an amazing time between the, end and the beginning to
It's such a
come into the
liminal
world.
time. It's such a liminal time.
Yes.
He had to be born pretty near the cusp anyway then.
Yeah. And he had a tenuous entry into the world and was in the NICU for a while. And to me, that made so much sense because of it being Simchat Torah, that the beginning and ending were just like trying to find each other.
Right.
But that was what was going on for me, just in my Hebraic time frame and my own personal experience with the holiday cycle. So it just really helped me broaden that. So I am fascinated to hear that you
I always
bring
do that.
Torah in.
I always do that with my clients. It's part of the whole process that I go through with them when I show them the picture and say, This is the picture of what it looked like, a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional reality, which was the actual date, time, and place you were born. And here is what it looked like in the Torah. This is where we were in the story. Your soul, your neshama, came in at this point in the story. Enter you. Why?
Yeah. Okay.
Let's
So
think about that.
everybody has homework to go. I think it's easy to do. You just Google Hebrew calendar, year you were born, and then
just go to Chabad.org. They have the whole thing. Enter your Hebrew birthday.
That's right.
They'll tell you your parsha, and look at the day of the week you were born, and then you'll know which Torah portion. If you're born on Shabbos, you get the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. I remember doing that, and I was in Joseph Land.
Right.
Yeah. So that's wonderful.
But
okay,
of course, if you're born after sundown, you're on the next day. So you have to actually know how to calculate your Hebrew birthday.
That's right.
Right.
It starts at sunset. I want to share something. Let's see if I can find it. And maybe you have some things too that you want to look at. When I was teaching a class on the Hebrew calendar, I found all these like old mosaics and things that I was like, what is all of this? And I learned a little bit about it, but I would love for you to look at it with us.
I would love to.
Okay, let me see. I think I've got it. Here it is. Okay, let's go. Let's go to the first slide. So can you all see this mosaic?
Yeah,
Great.
That's one of the Mosaic synagogue floors. I don't know if that one is Beit Alpha or.
Yeah, this is Beit Alpha Synagogue, the mosaic floor. That's what I have.
Right.
So tell us about this. Everybody take a look. It's like you can see the circle, obviously, the signs. You see symbols that look familiar, like the Sagittarius archer down on the bottom, the scorpion for Scorpio, the Aryeh for lion. So clearly there's some confluence going on here with Jewish prayer space and astrology. So
right. Why, if astrology is so forbidden, why is it all over the floors and walls and ceilings of synagogues from antiquity through the eve of World War II? I would like to know.
I would too.
Well, I know why. I'm saying in general, when I moved to Israel in 2007 and made Aliyah, I had been doing astrology for many years at that point. I really started doing astrology professionally, meaning that people paid me for it, like in the 1980s. So by the time 2007 rolled around, I'd been doing astrology for many years, but when I got into Israel, I found out that there was such a thing as Jewish astrology. And I started learning about it there very intensively, studying Kabbalah, doing all the things you do when you make Aliyah. So really, I've been studying Jewish astrology for all of this time. And at the same time, after moving there, and I would tell people I was an astrologer, and I was at the time like a typical Baal Tshuva, so I was in a very religious communities, and people would say, "Oh, asur," which means forbidden. We're not allowed to talk about astrology. But then they would come to me privately and say, "I want you to do my chart, but don't tell anyone." So like, I was like super popular and doing all these from people's charts, but I could never reveal that, nor what could I advertise by saying, so-and-so would recommend me, but people would tell other people and whatever. But it was part of a real misunderstanding of what was normative reality. And if you want me to tell you why I think it is, I will tell you, and I'll just try to be really quick about it, which is that prior to World War II, this is from Rupture and Reconstruction by Chaim Soloveitchik. He was a great scholar who wrote this book, this essay, Rupture and Reconstruction, in which he says that what he called mimetic communal norms were destroyed and lost in the Holocaust, meaning that in Jewish communities before the Holocaust, from observant communities, religious communities, people operated by the means of what he called mimetic communal norms, mimetic as in mimicking, meaning that I'm a girl and my mother keeps kosher, and so does my grandmother, because we've always kept kosher. How do I know how to keep kosher? Because I'm in the kitchen with my mother and I see how she keeps the milk over here and the meat over here, how we wait this many hours, and like I'm mimicking, I'm learning by experience. I'm not reading the Shulchan Aruch, okay? So that's how religiosity or observance was normally operating. Then there's the Shoah. 99% of everybody is gone and nobody remembers how to do anything. How do you keep kosher? Do you remember what your mother did? Well, wait a minute. In my village, we did it this way. So everything after the Holocaust became text-based. It was all what is written in the text, not how do you remember how we did this in Anatek. So in the text, in the Shulchan Aruch, there's one line in one place that says you should not consult astrologers or those who cast horror, as in lots. Okay, so from people from that point on took it like, oh, we don't ask, we don't do astrology, not realizing that everybody did astrology before in a very normative way, not like it was the biggest thing and the most important thing in the world, but it was just something that was culturally normative.
Right. I mean, we say Mazel Tov is like
it was just like
we
a
say
thing.
to each other.
It was just like a totally normal thing.
Right.
A kid, there's a million examples. There's over here in the Magnus Museum in Berkeley, there's literally hundreds of swaddling cloths from medieval Ashkenaz, from the synagogues there. What were they? They were cloths that moms would embroider with for their newborn baby boys, because they would have a brit milah, and afterwards they would swaddle them. They would wind them up, so that they could heal nice. And afterwards they would launder these cloths, and all of the ladies of the community would take these cloths and stitch them together to make Torah covers, a cover for the most sacred thing. So what did they embroider on them? Zodiac signs, like Shlomo ben Pinchas, born under the Mazal of Dagim. Like they're all, the themes of these embroidered cloths are covered with astrological symbols, and they're on Torah scrolls. So explain to me how that matches with the understanding that we don't have anything to do with astrology. It can't be. So here we are in Beit Alpha. It was a synagogue floor. It has all 12 zodiac signs in a very in all of the classical ways of rendering them, meaning that humans are represented. Like if you look at Ta'umim, the twins, Gemini up here, you see them as human representations, also Virgo, etc. In some later representations, you'll see other kind of symbols besides human symbols substituted for some of the signs. It changes throughout the ages, but in this case, scholars think that this is Ezekiel and his chariot. In some cases, other people say it's the sun god Apollo with his chariot. There's not an agreement about it, but it's right there in a synagogue where people prayed from quote unquote Jews of their days.
Right.
So how is it possible that this was forbidden?
It's just so beautiful too. Like it's not only that it was practiced, but clearly it was like,
it was beautiful. And people understood the symbolism. They understood when you say to somebody when I do Jewish astrology and I'm talking to someone who's very religious, doesn't have a background in the Greco-Roman archetypes and mythological background, and I'm talking about Mars, or I'm talking about the first house, I'm going to be talking about their Yehuda energy. Okay. And it's translated into a language that they understand that literally means the same thing. When I'm saying that your Yehuda is getting overstimulated, that's completely understood as like my Mars is being triggered, So it's a scalable set of archetypes. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's an archetype in our language.
That's right. Because each, cultural framework contains archetypes that are deeply, that are ancient to us. So yeah, it's so beautiful. Okay, one more. And this one I thought was so interesting because as I was reading it, the inner circle, I notice it says like chokav, like stars, levana, moon. And then I was like, so what is this inner circle here going on? And yeah, talk a little bit about this illustration.
This is the signs of the zodiac encircling the names of the planets inside of the Sefer Evernote. It's an illuminated parchment manuscript from late 17th century Germany, and it's housed at the Hebrew Union College Library in Cincinnati, which I know not just because I'm smart, but because I have this great book written in the stars, which art and symbolism of the zodiac. That was it's by Iris Fischhoff, who is a great art historian, but this was all from an exhibition at the Hebrew Museum in Jerusalem in the year 2000. And there's all these examples and photographs of wonderful illustrations like this, and architecture, that all these things that belong to us. That was it was put on in the spring and summer of 2001 at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. I beg your pardon, not the Jewish Museum,
okay.
The museum. Yeah. So that's what that is. So these are the names of the planets on the inside, and then those are the zodiac signs. So you see Shabtai over here, and so you see Dali and that's his like and Dali. So it's Gedi Dali. So those are in classical astrology, Saturn, Shabtai is the planetary ruler of Capricorn.
I see. So these are the names, these are the Hebrew names of the planets.
On the inside, it's the planets. Like this says Tzedek, and up here is the two zodiac planets associated with Tzedek is Jupiter. So this is Dagim, which is Pisces, and Keshet, which is Sagittarius.
See, I find that incredibly fascinating because that's the nexus where the Jewish philosophers and thinkers have taken the attributes that are attributed to, let's say, Jupiter, expansiveness, wisdom, philosophy, and they've distilled it into a Hebrew word with its own meaning, and they have their own name for the planet, which corresponds to a specific energy or meaning in the Hebrew culture, in the Jewish culture.
Right. So those names have always been like the names of the planets as we know them now, like Tzedek and Shabtai for Jupiter and Saturn, Ma'adim for Mars, Noga. These are all found in the Talmud. So they've been in use since at least the 1st century or Second Temple times, assuming that they've probably been in use since the return from Babylon, because even in Solomonic times and First Temple times, you have that whole thing in Jeremiah about weeping for Tammuz. Tammuz is one of the months of the year corresponding to Cancer, ruled by the moon, associated with weeping and crying. Reuven, the most emotional of sons, as his father Yaakov says, Reuven, you're like unstable like water. He's so emotional, and his emotions got the better of him so many times, even though he was good-hearted, which is why he lost his leadership of the 12 tribes, even though he retained a very important cardinal position of leadership, meaning he was the southern tribe, on the southern point of the cardinal cross, basically, that made up the 4 cardinal signs, the 4 cardinal tribes around the Mishkan.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you for that. I am so looking forward to looking more deeply at each of those tribal leaders and learning their position on the wheel. That's a really amazing.
I'll give you my YouTube link. You can see 12 hours and look at all 12 of these.
Oh, that's amazing. What an incredible resource. Yes. So you kind of answered the question I had, which was, what was going on during both Talmudic times. I know there's lots of discussion and argument in the Talmud. Do we do this? Yes, no, and it seems like that's just the case in Judaism in general. it's such an ancient tradition that you're bound to going to have folks who did everything and said yes and said no to it all. So
Well,
that's so incredible.
I was going to say that in the Talmud, it's very unambiguous about certain things. It says without any argument that if a person has the ability to if they consider the ability to calculate the times and the seasons to be God-given, because it's so much math. And imagine doing all of that without computers or a calculator or anything. How is it that they came so close? Like the Hebrew calendar as it currently exists is a marvel of genius. And think of that, it was all put together in a prehistoric, pre-scientific era where it was all calculated purely by math and not by
right.
computers.
I read
So,
like during the Talmudic times, astrology was considered like a cutting edge science.
it was
like,
a science. There was no difference.
Yeah.
There was no difference whatsoever in between astrology and astronomy. They were the exact same practice until the early modern era, where there was a divorce because of modernity and quote unquote science,
right?
Where like the sciences got custody of astronomy, and the mysticism got custody of astrology. So that before that, they were considered one thing. So all astronomers were also astrologers and vice versa, because you had to be both.
Amazing. Okay. So we don't run out of time. I just want to finish before I open up if anyone else has questions with this question, which is I Googled Jewish astrologer, and literally you are there and like almost no one else like currently doing this, which blows my mind. I can't even believe that's true. And so I know you just convened a conference centered around the topic of Jewish astrology, and that I read that you had been visioning this conference for a really long time.
Yeah.
You included teachers that are deep inspirations to me, like Rabbi Jill Hammer, and I got to drop in on a few of the classes and was really inspired. And how did it go? How did the conference go? And will you do it again? And is this hopefully indicative of like a kind of broadening field of interest, curiosity, and support for reintegrating? Like that's a big interest of mine. I want to reintegrate pieces of our tradition that I feel like we lost and that would really be helpful to us all, like whether it's the inclusion of the divine feminine, the inclusion of the understanding of the whole cosmos as God's creation and influence on all these things. So how do you feel like that conference maybe is starting to create a little support for this? And talk to us about that.
Okay, so this conference was about Jewish astrology, but it was centered around the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that happened on December 21st. Because the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in what's called historical astrology is a Jewish phenomenon. Like we really took this phenomenon that started in the 3rd century of Persia and made it very much about us in terms of our understanding of world astrology, having to do with the cycles of time that are tied to Jupiter, Saturn, which mostly have to do with like not personal astrology, but world astrology, world affairs, the rise and falls of kingdoms, the rise and falls of great leaders are tied to these periodic conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn that operate on 3 different cycles. But in the long and the short of it, they operate in elemental triplicities, which is, elements are fire, air, earth, and water, and triplicities, like what it sounds like, 3, because 3 of them. So this particular conjunction was the first time that Jupiter and Saturn would be meeting in the sign of Aquarius since the year 1405. So having realized that about 2.5 years ago, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'm like, this is the age of Aquarius. Like literally it's an energetic doorway into this age. And I've been I was thinking while I was writing my thesis, and I was thinking during, thinking and planning, writing letters to famous academics and scholars and stuff. what do you think about this? Should we talk about it? I want to do a conference. And I spent a year and a half planning it to be in Jerusalem.
Oh, wow.
And talking to hotels about booking hotel rooms and flights and like brick and mortar. And then comes the pandemic. And I'm like, oh my God, no one's going to fly to Jerusalem. I mean, nobody could have imagined if I had gotten millions of grants and spent all this money on something that had to be completely canceled. So what happened is we ended up doing it online, which saved billions of dollars. So I didn't have to find fiscal sponsorship, and I was able to invite people from all over. And we did it online. It was so wonderful and so successful. We had like 147 people register. I was praying for 30, so I wouldn't have to give little honorariums to my guests out of my own pocket, which I was completely prepared to do, just because I wanted to do it for myself. I was hoping a few people would show up. I thought, if we got 30 registrants, we would totally break even. So having that many just totally blew my mind. But even more so for the actual astrologers and or people who have written about astrology, because there's Jewish astrologers who don't do Jewish astrology. They're just Jewish and they're astrologers, but they don't focus on Jewish astrology. And I'm not going to name names, but there's millions of them and they're all wonderful, but they don't do Jewish astrology. They do astrology and they're Jewish. And they bring a Jewish cup, they bring a Jewish headspace to it, but they don't filter it through a Torah lens or through a lens of being informed by our own traditions and practices. That's what I do. I'm not sure who else really does that in real time anymore. I know that there's some names. I mean, Shifra Bader is somebody in Spot who does that. She's very low profile and modest and not a big show off. So it's very hard to get a hold of her, and she doesn't do things, in public and stuff like that. So she's a private consultation person who I've been to, and I really respect her work.
That's what I sort of thought. I thought there probably are, but they're just flying under the radar.
Really under the radar. I mean, there's her, there's one other guy whose name I can't even remember right now. I'm sorry, I'm very embarrassed to say it, and who's outside of Jerusalem, and I'm Moshav somewhere, who always people are like, you have to meet this person, but we've never met. And I'm sure people say that to him. There's people who are like, I know that Rabbi David Ingvar of Ramamu is a Jewish astrologer. He understands astrology through a Jewish lens, but I don't know so much about his practice, about how it actually informs his practice, or technique wise. There's some techniques that I think of as Jewish techniques, like in the Talmud, it has a whole section arguing about which is more influential, the planetary ruler of the day you were born, or the planetary ruler of the hour that you were born, which of course means your rising sign, right? Because every rising sign is ruled by a planet. And that's basic Jewish astrology 101, is looking at a chart at the planetary, like what's your chart has Leo rising, meaning the sun, which is the planetary ruler of Leo, is your actual ruling planet. My have Libra rising, that makes Venus my ruling planet. So where's Venus in my chart, etc. So that's what I call using a Jewish astrological technique. Also, in Jewish astrology really emphasizes the emphasis on the nodal axis, the north and south node, which is hinted at in the Sefer Yetzirah, when it talks about the Tali, which is translated as the dragon or the hook. And it's a reference to the nodal axis. And it says that the dragon in the universe is like a king upon his throne. And that's like, if you really unpack that in terms of astrology, you understand that the nodal axis in a person's chart is so indicative of their tikkun point. It's like, it really gives a hint about their personal tikkun in this particular Gilgal, in this incarnation that they're in. Also, Ibn Ezra, Avraham Ibn Ezra, who was a great Torah commentator, Mara Epstein has written a lot, as she's really the foremost translator of his works into his astrological works into English for simple understanding. And he formulated what he calls his 8 macro astrological rules of things like, okay, Wendy, your chart says you are destined to be a queen, Mazal Tov, but you happen to live in this town called, what is that place that was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius? Why can't I remember?
Pompeii.
What?
Pompeii.
Pompeii. Oh, I'm sorry. You happen to live in Pompeii, and the chart of Pompeii says Pompeii is going to be the whole town is going to be destroyed by a volcano. So which is going to come true? It's always a thing that's bigger or more universal. So sorry, you don't get to be a queen because unfortunately you live in Pompeii, and that's destined to blow up. So that's how Ibn Ezra explains charts that are like, how do you understand all these competing
Conflicting model.
Yeah, conflicting models. It's like there's a hierarchy. Some of the hierarchy is downright insane, like where you were born in the world, what the weather was like. Like some of the things that he says, like you can't bring it up to the 21st century, and I won't repeat them here, but it has to do with being born in certain climates, making you just too dense to really understand what's going on. But I kind of understand that because I get like that in the heat. You know, if you put me in a hot climate, I will not have one intelligent word to say because I'm about to overheat and die. But that's just me.
Well, I'm so glad the conference went well and that the energy was strong. People showed up, and just learning, like in preparing for this interview with you, I learned about Ibn Ezra and all of the different books that he wrote. I had never heard of him. It's like amazing. Like I've been in Jewish leadership for 20 years, and where, I felt the same reading Gershon Winkler's Shamanic, Magic of the Ordinary. Like, thank God for you and teachers that are bringing light and energy to places that really it's all of our birthright to have access to these riches. So I thank you so much for that. And I really want to open up if anybody has questions for Lorelei about Jewish astrology, please jump in and ask a question.
So I want to ask me anything, and even if I don't know, I'll tell you the answer.
I want to thank you both. This has been amazing, wonderful. But are we supposed to finish at 5? Are we finishing in a minute?
Yeah, if you can't stay and you have to leave, please do. We'll probably just
have to leave. It's just the question is going to take a long time.
Well, what's the question? What's your question?
This isn't probably a naive question, but I never really understood how do we use astrology and reading that to actually aid us in our lives and guide us?
That's a good question, and I can answer it pretty simply. I think that it's a reflective tool. That's how I use it. So when I work with clients, a lot of times, how like you look in the mirror every day, you look at yourself, I brushed my teeth, I did this or that, fine. I'm out the door, but you don't really know what you look like. So when suddenly you have somebody else hold up a mirror for you, someone who doesn't know you, I mean, I do my best work with people I don't know because I have no preconceived notions with them. So I'm holding up a mirror of your chart and showing you the reflection of yourself as in your potentiality state. So it's just a way of looking at yourself that opens up all these understandings of yourself, broadens understandings of yourself and your own potentialities, helps you to see your own strengths and your own gifts and understand your challenges in ways. And I found that people almost all the time say the exact same thing to me after I do a reading, which is I actually knew pretty much everything you said here. I just had no way of articulating it to myself. I had no way of putting it into words to explain myself to myself. So it is about enhanced self-understanding. So what doesn't that help you with? It helps you with everything. So when you understand about if you're wired a certain way and you know that you have certain kind of triggers because you have a Sun-Mars conjunction in Aries in your 7th house, so you're always going to be mad at your partner about something, then when it happens, you can say, oh, I'm just operating on this little wiring system I have going on that automatically makes me default to look at you and to see what you've done wrong. Let me first see if there's something maybe I did wrong. Let's talk about this. It gives you a little bit of a better insight into yourself and how you're wired so that you can, understand yourself better. And understanding oneself, I think, is the key to everything. That's my feeling.
Thank you.
Beautifully said. Yeah, as I mentioned, when I met up with Aunt Angie and her little papers, I felt relief because I felt my nature kind of just reflected back to me in a way that just made me at ease with myself. I don't know. So that that's kind of a little bit of what you're saying.
Judith has a
Beautiful.
question here. Can I read this?
Yes, yes.
Okay, she said, I don't know if you said this already as I came in late, which I didn't, but what drew you to study and practice astrology initially, and do you gear your days and plans activities based around your chart for the week? How much does astrology impact your daily life? In other words, okay, that's a great question.
Can I tell them that you told me the date for our talk today was that today was a good day to do it because the stars were favorable.
Yeah, I felt like it was a good day. It is a good day. Look what a good day it is.
What's going on
The moon's
today?
in Pisces. It's like a gentle
Yes.
day, you know. It's so no, I mean the truth is I am very aware of the planets all the time because like that's my job and that's what I do. So I kind of know where they are all the time. I just finished writing my forecast for a magazine that I write for called Chronogram, that I do monthly solar astrology forecasts for, meaning not Jewish astrology, what I call just straight astrology. And then I just finished writing my horoscopes for Chodesh Nisan, which is a whole different thing because part of it's in March and part of it's in April. So my head is always a month or 2 or 3 ahead of time and then looking at the whole year. And sometimes I totally forget where the planets are. Like today I was all hyper crazy and I'm like, what's going on with Mars? Of course, Mars is in Gemini. I know that, but I'm not thinking about it. So I really don't plan very much around what is going on in the stars in terms of my everyday stuff. It's like, I'm not waiting for perfect conditions to do things, or I would never get anything done because there is no perfect conditions. But I definitely do try to, it's like surfing. It's like you watch for a wave and you ride it. Like I know based on my rhythms that I'm going to do better at certain times of the day during certain hours that I'm going to do at other times, and also certain days depending on whatever's going on is going to be better for certain things like getting your hair cut. But everybody knows this because it's in the Farmer's Almanac. It's like the whole Farmer's Almanac is about astrology, like when to plant, when to harvest, cut your hair on a new moon. If you want it to grow faster, cut it on a full moon. If you want it to grow slower. I have moon in Leo, so I'm really sensitive about my hair. Anyone with a lot of Leo has hair issues. So you can only get your hair cut if the moon is in a Venus sign and stuff like that. I have silly rules like that. Okay. But it's not, and then of course about taking journeys and stuff like that, long journeys. I will look at the stars for things like that, but I don't let it rule my life. Lots of times other things happen, like there's 3 Mercury retrograde periods per year. There's always going to be Mercury retrograde. Can I make everything stop during that time? No. Have I started whole semesters at school during Mercury retrogrades? Yes. That I can't make the school stop their schedule because of Mercury retrograde. I just have to know that I'm going to have to go back and review certain things. So you just have to know how to describe the conditions. It's like weather. It's like, is it going to rain? There's a 30% chance of rain. There's a 30% chance I'm going to have to redo all of this work that I just did because of what's going on. So, and I got interested in astrology by reading Linda Goodman's Sun Signs, which was given to me as a gift for my 12th birthday by my best friend, an Aquarian, my friend Rob Harrison. She used to live and be well. And I read it, and much like you, I was like entranced immediately. I was like, oh my God, this is so true. But this was like 1971. And so within a very short period of time, I realized that there were other things besides the sun sign. There was a moon sign, rising sign, planets. I got my first ephemeris. When I was like 13, I started doing everybody's charts that I could lay my hands on. And, I was just so curious about what it looked like, but also doing charts the old fashioned way, by hand, drawing them myself, doing my own calculations with a compass and a protractor. Now I'll just press some buttons and boom, I've got a chart. It's like a miracle.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. We have time maybe for one more quick question if anyone has one. Great. Oh, let's see. One came in from Mark. Hi, Mark. Popped in.
Hi, Mark. Is
there any rationale to when and how to use the straight astrology versus Jewish astrology?
I think that that's basically the same thing, only using a different language system. So of course, to me, Jewish astrology has everything to do with the cycle of sacred time. That's the Jewish year, and the cycle of time that we use in our things like Shemitah and Yovel, the Jubilee year and stuff. So we have an entire understanding of the cycle of sacred time, and we know this from the Torah without our astrological understanding. So adding the astrological understanding on top of that makes it ever so much richer. And really, like, we can look up into the moon at any position. If you understand the cycle of time, you can know what month you're in. You know where the moon is when it's full, because it's always opposite where the sun is. If you know the sun is in Pisces, you know when you see the full moon, it has to be in Virgo, just like every month. If you see a quarter moon and you understand that you're looking at either a waning or a waxing moon, you understand that these are, I'm making like a plus sign because it's the cardinal rule, so to speak. It's always the opposite and the square signs that are the full moons, new moons, and quarter, waning, and waxing moons of every lunar cycle. So it gets to be a thing where you can literally look at the sky and know what time it is on our cycle of sacred time. And that's a Jewish understanding of astrology. What a straight or normal Western astrology is a solar. It's more solar oriented. So you think about the solar months, and it's not as observable in that way, the same way that Jewish astrology is. Plus, we have all of our full moon holidays, so we're so synced to the moon. The moon is our ruling planet in that way, because David Melech, the moon, everything. You know, the moon is Israel, Klal Yisrael.
That's right.
The people.
And I think I loved what you just said about observing and, and learning what things are by where they are and what it looks like, and knowing where the sun is. And I remember teaching a Rosh Chodesh class and reading that the actual physical observance of the new moon was the only way that the new month would be announced. You had to see it with your own eyes. So there's something in our tradition very strongly connected to actually observing and being intimately connected with these celestial bodies, which in our modern lives, like, how many of us spend quality time with the stars, right?
Right. I love that your family can have astronomers. So I'm so jealous that you grew up with telescopes and stuff. That's like the most wonderful thing. And we used to interrogate people. Like, they would come to say, we saw the new moon. And then the rabbis would put them through their paces. And Rabbi Gamliel had all these charts in his chamber, and he'd bring them in and say, did it look like this? Did it look like this or this? Like, and they're trying to describe it. And then they decide, like, are these people just lying? But like, come on, what kind of people travel all the way to Jerusalem to testify they saw the new moon in Babylon and have made it up like it's a complete lie? Why would anybody do that? But they
early fake news.
It's true. That's why, you know what, you're so right about that. That's why they made 2-day Yontif Chutzlah outside of the land of Israel. They can't really be trusted.
We can't be sure. We can't be sure. I read also that it was permissible to violate Shabbos, to ride your horse as fast as you could to report if you did see the new moon. So that's how important these observations are, and these moments of actually observing and connecting with the cycles of our rotations. And it's easy to forget that we're a part of that huge galaxy universe.
We're so connected.
Yeah. So thank you, Lorelei, so much. I'm going to wrap us up for today. I hope we'll talk again. I learned so much today. I'm sure we all did. And I'm going to percolate with everything we learned and have more questions shortly, I'm sure.
Okay. This was so fun. Thank you so much. And I'm so honored to be your second guest in your series. And I wish you all the most Mazal Tov in
Mazal Tov.
all things.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much.